Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Mortgage Matters in Minutes, sponsored to you by Mortgage Specialists. So we're coming back today at 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon as our regular meetings of information. So we feel that education, again, is very important here at Mortgage Specialists. We thought today we'd talk about what are prepaids and what are closing costs. So that conversation comes up very often among first-time home buyers, or actually anyone purchasing a house or refinancing their loan, because when we speak with clients, a lot of times they are familiar with the word down payment, but they don't always consider the additional costs that might be involved to take on a mortgage loan. And those two important costs that we speak to our clients about and give them the breakdowns are called prepaids and closing costs. So what are those? And we're going to get right into it today and talk about prepaids first. Prepaids, all they are is an amount that's prepaid for the future. And usually those two amounts break down into property taxes and homeowners insurance. And the reason why they're prepaid in advance is because we set up an escrow account for our clients so that when their taxes and their insurance come due, there's money in those escrow accounts to be able to pay those taxes and insurance. And someone would say, well, why would I prepay and put money in those accounts ahead of time? The reason is because a lot of times if you don't collect for that escrow account, your taxes come twice a year and your insurance comes once a year. And those checks or dues or payments are actually very high. So when your taxes are $5,000, you receive generally around here, your taxes in March are due in July, are due. So they're due by April 1st and by August 1st. And so when you receive that bill for $2,500, that's for some people a lot of money to write a check out for. So when we say we're collecting for prepaids, we're putting money into an account set aside for those costs. So when those amounts come due, they'll be able to pay for those. Prepaids are hard to plan for the dollar amount because on every single property it's different, because every single home in town is going to have different property taxes and different house insurance. And we can look up the property taxes, but homeowners insurance sometimes is more difficult to quote depending on what insurance agent or what's going on with the property. So the prepaids generally are kind of a window. We can estimate those for clients to make sure that they have enough to expect. And we like to here at Mortgage Specialists estimate on the highest end side just to make sure we're not short. You know, we want to give our consumers what they're going to expect to bring in at closing, not something less than that. So the second question is, then what are closing costs? And closing costs are just as they state, but sometimes people use the word closing costs, meaning all of the money that they might need. But in actuality, closing costs are just the monies that are needed basically for third-party charges. So the lender is going to charge usually an underwriting fee or a commitment fee. They also will generally have an appraisal and a credit report fee. A lot of people would assume that the credit reports are going to, the closing costs are going to all go to the lender, and they don't all go to the lender. Only the appraisal, and the appraisal doesn't go to the lender either, but only the underwriting fee and the commitment fee is generally going to go to the lender. Where all the other closing costs are third-party charges. So the credit report fee is going to go to the vendor that we use to obtain the credit report. Appraisal is the same way. It's going to be paid to the appraiser directly to do an appraisal. Other closing costs that are needed are going to generally be title closing fees, title insurance, other endorsements that are needed with title, the closing fees to sit down and go over the documents with you to close on those documents. And then there's recording fees at the courthouse where they're going to take the deed of trust and they're going to, the county is going to charge per page to record that deed of trust to ensure the lender's interest in securing that mortgage need. So closing costs should generally be somewhere between $2,000 to, let's call it, I usually say $2,000 to $3,000. Unless you have more of an expensive property, maybe above $400,000 or $500,000, your closing costs could range between $3,000 to $4,000. The reason why we bring attention to that is because a lot of online lenders will charge closing costs much higher than that. And why would they do such a thing? It's not that they are, necessarily always adding additional fees, but sometimes they might add extra closing costs to give you a cheaper interest rate. And again, all lenders can do that, but normal closing costs are going to be somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000. So again, what are prepaids and closing costs? We explain both of those, but why is that so important to know what those are? Is again, when you obtain a mortgage, whether you're buying a house or you're refinancing, you don't just have the down payment amount that you need to bring in for buying a house, or when you refinance a loan, you don't just take out a new loan necessarily for what you owe. There are these other fees called prepaids and closing costs that are going to incur on every single loan. And one thing people state is, I've taken out a refinance loan or a house loan and I paid no closing costs. You definitely can do that. Lenders will generally just bump up the interest rate higher to cover those closing costs, because those costs are real third-party fees. They have to be services rendered according to RESPA law for it to be a fee that's charged to you at closing, whether you're buying a house or refinancing. So again, in quick summary, we're here always to give you what those costs would be. When a client is looking to purchase a home, we're going to give them a fees worksheet or a loan estimate, depending on where we're at in the process, itemizing out what these prepaids and closing costs are to make sure our client is prepared for that. The reason why we also like to discuss this early and often in advance is because many first-time home buyers aren't planning on these fees. They're again used to coming up with down payment, but not thinking that they might need the $3,000 in closing costs. And prepaids could be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, depending on how much the home is worth and how much the taxes and the insurance are and what levies they're in and what neighborhoods they're in. So prepaids and closing costs make a big, big difference for when you're obtaining a mortgage loan, and those are the items that you're able to shop. No matter what lender you're going through, everybody's going to have the exact same prepaids. Those are the same, and they're structured by federal law. It's also a law under RESPA that says you cannot over collect for too much taxes and insurance. But the closing costs are the amounts that you are able to shop between lender to lender to see which one is going to give you the cheapest price. Usually the closing costs are going to be in comparison with the interest rate, and they're going to go side by side. So the more expensive the closing costs are, generally the cheaper the interest rate is. And the same was backwards. So if the closing costs are lower, your interest rate is going to be higher. So that gives you a little bit of information today, the difference between what prepaids are, which are taxes in your insurance put into a separate account, prepaid in advance for when they're due. And closing costs are going to be costs the lender may charge, or all third parties such as title companies, appraisers, credit report vendors, tax service fees, flood certification fees, things like that that are needed to protect not only the borrower, but to protect the lender. So thanks again for checking in today, guys, and hanging out with us for another week here of Mortgage Matters in Minutes. Again, if you ever need to get a hold of us for any questions whatsoever, we'd love to help. You can give us a phone call at 402-991-5153, or you can reach out to us on our website at mtg-specialists.com. And hope you guys have all a great week, and we'll talk to you very soon. Thanks so much.
Mortgage Specialists. Driven, trusted, reliable.